I never imagined that an ordinary walk with my service dog would end with an arrest and a harsh legal lesson for an HOA Karen. What started as a peaceful afternoon stroll through my neighborhood quickly escalated into one of the most shocking confrontations I've ever experienced. This isn't just another entitled Karen story, this is about how federal law protects service animal handlers and the serious consequences when someone crosses that line. My name is Max, and after serving 2 tours overseas, I returned home with PTSD that made everyday life nearly impossible. That's when Luna came into my picture, a professionally trained service dog who alerts me before panic attacks and grounds me during episodes. She's not just my companion, she's my lifeline, my guardian angel who's made it possible for me to rejoin society and function again. The day everything happened, Luna was wearing her official service vest with clear patches stating, "Service dog, do not pet," as she always does when we're in public. We had been living in our condo complex for nearly 6 months without issues until that fateful day when the HOA board's newest member decided that rules were rules, regardless of federal disability laws. Little did she know that her actions wouldn't just violate my rights, they would land her in handcuffs facing criminal charges that would change her life forever. Pinewood Estates had always seemed like the perfect place to rebuild my life after returning from deployment. A well-maintained property with manicured lawns, a community pool, and walking paths that wound through small patches of woodland, all protected by the watchful eyes of the Homeowners Association. The HOA at Pinewood prided itself on maintaining property values through strict enforcement of community guidelines, including detailed pet policies. These rules stipulated that pets must be kept on leashes at all times in common areas, owners must clean up after their animals, and there was a strict 2 pets per household limit with weight restrictions. What the rulebook failed to address, however, was the federal protections granted to service animals, an oversight that would soon create the perfect storm. I had moved in knowing the rules but also understanding my rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act, which clearly states that service animals are not considered pets and are exempt from such restrictions. I had even taken the extra step of sending a formal letter to the HOA board explaining Luna's status and attaching copies of her certification and training documentation. For 6 months, our routine had been peaceful: morning walks through the community garden, afternoon strolls to the small pond at the center of the property, and occasional visits to the clubhouse when I needed to pay my dues or attend community meetings. That Tuesday afternoon was unusually warm for October, the kind of Indian summer day that coaxes everyone outdoors. Luna and I were taking our usual path toward the pond when I noticed a woman I'd seen at the last HOA meeting, Deborah Wilson, the newly elected board secretary who had campaigned on promises of tightening up community standards. She was standing near the gazebo with a clipboard, seemingly taking notes on various property infractions. As we approached, I could feel her eyes narrow at the sight of Luna, despite my dog's perfect behavior and clear service vest. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying that unmistakable tone of authority that some people adopt when they believe rules are being broken. "Dogs aren't allowed in the garden area without being on a leash." Luna was indeed on a leash, so I politely pointed this out while continuing our walk. Deborah power-walked to intercept us, her kitten heels clacking aggressively against the concrete path. "The board has received complaints about your dog," she announced, though this was news to me. "Several residents have expressed concerns about allergies and safety." I took a deep breath, summoning the patience my therapist had been working on with me. "Ma'am, as I've documented with the HOA, Luna is a service animal protected under federal law. She's not classified as a pet under the Fair Housing Act or the Americans with Disabilities Act." I gestured to Luna's vest with its clear markings. Deborah's expression soured as if I just quoted obscure technicalities rather than established law. "Rules are rules," she insisted, her voice rising. "The HOA doesn't recognize any special exceptions. If everyone started claiming their pets were service animals, we'd have a zoo around here." The conversation was beginning to trigger my anxiety, confrontation being one of my key PTSD triggers, and Luna sensed it immediately, pressing her body against my leg in a trained response to provide grounding pressure. This physical contact from Luna is critical during moments of rising stress, helping to prevent full-blown panic attacks before they start. Unfortunately, Deborah misinterpreted this trained behavior as aggression. "See? The dog is acting threatening now," she declared, taking a step back and reaching into her large designer handbag. "Luna is performing her trained task," I explained, trying to keep my voice level while feeling my heart rate increasing. She's sensing my anxiety and providing pressure therapy. This is exactly why she's protected as a service animal. But Deborah wasn't listening. Instead, she pulled out a small canister. What I would later discover was a combination of citrus oil and vinegar spray she used as a natural dog deterrent around her own yard. Without warning, she aimed directly at Luna and sprayed. The effect was immediate and devastating. Luna yelped in pain and confusion as the solution hit her face, particularly her eyes and sensitive nose. A service dog's ability to perform their tasks depends entirely on their senses, and Luna's had just been violently compromised. She began pawing at her face, whimpering in distress while trying to maintain her training to stay by my side. The sight of Luna in pain sent a surge of protective anger through me that momentarily overwhelmed my anxiety. "What have you done?" I shouted, dropping to my knees to help Luna, who was frantically rubbing her face against the grass trying to relieve the burning sensation. Several residents who had been enjoying the afternoon sun turned to witness the commotion. I pulled out my water bottle and began gently rinsing Luna's eyes while she trembled against me. "You've just assaulted a service animal, that's a federal offense." Deborah seemed momentarily stunned by my reaction, but quickly recovered her indignation. "Don't be ridiculous," she scoffed. "It's just a natural citrus spray. If you'd followed the rules, this wouldn't have happened." She then had the audacity to add, "And don't think about reporting this. I'm on the board, and we stick together." That's when I pulled out my phone with my free hand and dialed 911, my fingers shaking with a mixture of anxiety and determination. "I need to report an assault on a service animal at Pinewood Estates," I told the dispatcher, my voice unsteady but resolute. I explained the situation in detail, emphasizing Luna's protected status and the unprovoked nature of the attack. The dispatcher assured me officers would arrive shortly and advised me to continue rinsing Luna's eyes and to avoid further engagement with the woman. By this point, a small crowd had gathered, with several neighbors I recognized looking concerned. One neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who had always smiled at Luna and me during our walks, came forward with a clean towel and additional bottled water to help. She did this on purpose, Mrs. Chen told the gathering crowd, having witnessed the entire incident from her patio. "I saw everything. The dog was behaving perfectly." Another neighbor, a retired veterinarian, approached to examine Luna and confirmed that while the spray was causing significant discomfort, it likely wouldn't cause permanent damage if we continued flushing her eyes. He offered to document Luna's condition for police records. Deborah, now aware that multiple witnesses were contradicting her version of events, began a strategic retreat. "This is being blown completely out of proportion," she announced to anyone who would listen. "The HOA will be hearing about this disturbance." But her attempted exit was halted by the arrival of 2 police cruisers at the entrance to the garden. The officers approached our gathering with professional caution, taking in the scene, a service dog in obvious distress, a crowd of concerned residents, and a woman clutching a spray canister who looked simultaneously defiant and increasingly worried. What followed was a textbook example of law enforcement done right. The officers separated everyone involved, taking statements individually, while a third officer who arrived later had specialized training with service animals and immediately recognized the severity of the situation. I provided Luna's documentation, which I always carry in my wallet alongside my own ID. Mrs. Chen and 3 other witnesses gave statements confirming my account of events. The retired veterinarian provided his professional assessment of Luna's condition, which thankfully was improving with the continuous eye flushing, though she remained distressed and disoriented, potentially compromising her ability to perform her vital tasks for days to come. The officer with service animal training, Sergeant Martinez, approached Deborah with a calm but authoritative demeanor that comes from years on the force. "Ma'am, I need to explain something very important to you," he began, gesturing toward Luna, who was still recovering with the help of the retired veterinarian. "What you've done today isn't just against HOA policy or even state law, it's a federal offense." Deborah's expression shifted from indignation to confusion, then to the first flickers of genuine concern. "That's ridiculous," she sputtered. "It's just a dog, and I'm enforcing community guidelines." Sergeant Martinez shook his head slowly. Service animals are protected under multiple federal statutes, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Fair Housing Act, and specifically for your actions today, the Service Animal Access Act, which makes it a federal crime to interfere with, harm, or attempt to harm a service animal. He pointed to Luna's vest with its clear markings. Those identifiers aren't just for show, ma'am. They carry legal weight. As the reality of her situation began to sink in, Deborah's demeanor changed dramatically. The color drained from her face as Sergeant Martinez continued explaining the potential consequences of her actions, penalties that could include substantial fines and even jail time. But I didn't know, she protested weakly, her earlier confidence evaporating. Ignorance of the law isn't a defense, Officer Chen, the second responding officer, explained while taking notes. Especially when Mr. Henderson here has documentation showing he properly notified the HOA of his service animal's status months ago. At this point, Mrs. Chen stepped forward and handed the officers her phone. I recorded part of it, she said quietly. After she sprayed the dog, she threatened him about reporting it because she's on the board. The video evidence was damning, capturing not just the assault on Luna but Deborah's subsequent attempt to use her position to intimidate me into silence. What happened next still seems surreal whenever I recall it. Sergeant Martinez asked Deborah to place her purse on the bench and step away from it. He then read her Miranda rights as Officer Chen took out handcuffs. Deborah Wilson, you're under arrest for assaulting a service animal, which is a federal offense, and for threatening the animal's handler in an attempt to prevent reporting of a crime. The shock on Deborah's face mirrored the stunned expressions of everyone watching as she was escorted to the police cruiser, hands cuffed behind her back. The HOA president, alerted by another resident, arrived just in time to witness Deborah being placed in the back of the police car, a moment that would become infamous in community gossip for months to come. The legal process that followed was eye-opening, not just for Deborah but for our entire community. The district attorney chose to pursue the case seriously, understanding its significance as a precedent for service animal protections in our county. I was asked to testify about Luna's training, her essential role in managing my PTSD symptoms, and the impact of the assault on both her ability to perform her duties and my own well-being in the days that followed. Luna's trainer provided expert testimony on the specialized training service dogs receive and how chemical exposure can temporarily or permanently affect their ability to perform life-saving tasks. The retired veterinarian who had helped us that day gave his professional assessment of Luna's injuries and the potential long-term sensory impacts. 3 months after that fateful afternoon, I sat in a courtroom watching as Deborah stood to receive her sentence. Gone was the entitled, rule-wielding HOA board member, replaced by a subdued woman who had lost her position, her standing in the community, and now potentially her freedom. The judge, a Vietnam veteran himself, delivered what I felt was a fair but firm sentence: 6 months in county jail with all but 30 days suspended, 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service specifically working with disability advocacy organizations, mandatory education on disability rights and laws, and $5,000 in restitution for Luna's veterinary care and temporary replacement service while she recovered. Ms. Wilson, the judge had said before reading the sentence, this court wants to make it absolutely clear that service animals are not pets. They are medical equipment essential to their handlers' ability to function in society with independence and dignity. Interfering with them is akin to tampering with a wheelchair or removing someone's prosthetic limb. It directly impacts their ability to navigate the world. The law recognizes this, and so must you and everyone else. The courtroom was silent as his words resonated through the space, and I noticed several people, including members of the jury, nodding in solemn agreement. The case made regional news and eventually caught the attention of several disability rights organizations. What started as a terrifying personal experience became an important educational moment for communities across our state. The most significant outcome wasn't Deborah's punishment but the awareness it created. Within weeks, the State Housing Authority issued updated guidelines to all HOAs clarifying federal protections for service animals. Our own HOA, under new leadership, organized a community education session on disability rights featuring speakers from service dog training organizations and legal experts in disability law. They revised their bylaws to explicitly acknowledge the legal status of service animals and implemented a confidential registration system for residents with service animals to prevent similar incidents. For Luna and me, the aftermath was both challenging and affirming. Luna required several weeks of recovery as the chemical exposure had temporarily damaged her scent detection abilities, a crucial component of her training that allows her to detect the biochemical changes that precede my panic attacks. During this period, the service dog organization that had originally trained Luna provided a temporary service dog named Cooper to assist me. This transition was difficult. The bond between a handler and service dog is profound, and even though Cooper was expertly trained, he didn't know my specific patterns and signals the way Luna did. Those weeks reinforced how perfectly matched Luna and I had become, how finely tuned our communication had grown over our years together. The silver lining came in the form of community support we never expected. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance, perhaps unsure how to interact with someone with PTSD and a service dog, now went out of their way to check on us. People stopped to ask permission before approaching Luna once she returned to duty, demonstrating a new understanding of service animal etiquette. The HOA created a small fenced area specifically designated as a service animal relief area near my unit. Most touching was the group of neighbors who organized a rotation bringing meals during Luna's recovery period when my own symptoms were more difficult to manage without her full assistance. Today, nearly a year later, Luna has fully recovered and returned to her duties with the same dedication and intelligence that makes her extraordinary at her job. We still live at Pinewood Estates, though many things have changed. Deborah completed her jail time and has moved away, but her legacy remains in the form of greater awareness and respect for service animals in our community. I now serve as a consultant for the HOA on accessibility issues, helping them ensure their policies respect the rights of all residents. Luna and I also volunteer once a month at a local rehabilitation center where we help educate people about service animals and the laws protecting them. The incident that could have destroyed my sense of safety in my own community instead became a catalyst for positive change. It's a reminder that sometimes it takes a dramatic event to enlighten people about the rights and needs of those living with disabilities. While I would never wish to relive that day in the garden, I'm grateful for the conversation it started and the changes it inspired. For anyone watching this who works in property management, serves on an HOA board, or simply shares public spaces with service animal teams, remember that these animals aren't just pets. They're lifelines, independence makers, and in many cases like mine, the difference between isolation and participation in society. And they're protected not just by vests and patches, but by federal law that recognizes their essential importance in the lives of those they serve.